So when your children are grown, divorce looks a little different. So you're not doing the classic custody, parenting plans, child support, but it does still matter that you have children, and your children will have feelings about your divorce, and you'll have feelings about your children's feelings about your divorce. So just because they're adults, it doesn't mean that the divorce doesn't impact them. And it doesn't mean that you're not still a parent who cares about how the divorce impacts their children. So I think that if you're an empty nester, you want to be candid about that with your attorney. It's not that we can do a parenting plan for a 30-year-old. We can't. The courts are not going to give us a lot of time on that. But it does mean that we can structure things in a way that tends to support your ongoing relationship with your adult children, and also that you know how to talk to them about it. You know best practices on when to involve them in the decisions you're making and when to spare them from the decisions that you're making. And it can be a great idea to onboard a therapist to help you figure out how to be a great parent to adult children as you transition out of a marriage from their other parent. When you are a parent of adult children, one of the things that comes up in the context of that divorce is retirement assets and how things are being structured, and making sure we are living up to our joint commitments to supporting the children. So one of the things that happens, for example, with college students is how are we going to figure out paying for college? How is tuition going to be handled? How much of the court's involvement is available to assist with that? That's one question. Another thing is, what about beneficiaries? What if you had trusts set up for your children? What if there are UTMA accounts? What if there are old 529 plans that are there and your children didn't use all of the assets, or they aren't all the way through their secondary schooling? So all of these things come into play in a divorce, even when your children are over the age of 18. And what you're going to want to do is explain this to your lawyers and make sure they know it so that they can tell you what the court can formally help with, what there are options to negotiate, how to perhaps structure things so that your goals for your adult children are also met. And another thing I always like to mention in this context is that many people remarry down the line after a divorce, and they wind up in a situation where they have children from their prior marriage that ended, and they're wondering how to navigate making sure their children are financially taken care of, whether it's as beneficiaries of retirement accounts, trust beneficiaries, in general inheritance questions. And a lot of that is a wise idea to enter into a prenup before entering into a new marriage. So in other words, if you have children from a previous marriage, before you get remarried, seriously consider entering into a prenup to make sure that your children are provided for financially in the way that you intended. Some of our clients who are getting divorced for the first time in their 50s and 60s have understandable anxiety about what the next chapter might look like. And so during the divorce, the way that can shake out is, what will my retirement planning look like? Will I be able to afford things? How do I care for our children? Even though they're adults, as a parent, I want to make sure they're still taken care of emotionally and financially. But then one of the things that people wonder is, what is life like after a divorce that was a really long marriage? What's it like to be single after being married to the same person for 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 years? Well, I think the answer is different for a lot of people, but there are some real interesting stories that I think of fondly about people that have done really neat things post-divorce. I know a lot of people that move to the place that they've always wanted to live. Maybe that's outside of Connecticut. Maybe it's outside of the country. And so they set up this life for themselves that is something that before they only sort of dreamed of and thought of casually, but now they're actually doing it. I've also seen multiple people launch small businesses that they always wanted to do. I've seen people retire and start completely new careers, whether maybe not opening their own business like the other folks I talked about, but maybe becoming a yoga teacher or starting a career in marketing when they were on the financial side before, or doing consulting along the lines of what their professional career was previously, but in a way that gives them more flexibility, perhaps more travel if that's what they're interested in. So I think that one of the things about having adult children and going on to a next chapter after a long marriage is that you really get to rewrite the script and just pick how you want to spend your life. An issue that gets brought up in the context of people who are in long marriages and are now empty nesters is how alimony works. So it is a little bit different. Let's take a somewhat classic situation where you have one high earner and one spouse who either worked part-time or who didn't work outside the home. Well, even in a long marriage, that might not be a situation where there's a really long alimony term if it's likely that there's going to be a retirement. So in other words, you may see more of a sharing of property and retirement accounts and cash accounts than you do see an extended alimony payment. Not true in all cases. Sometimes there's still lifetime alimony. Sometimes someone's hope is to work for years and years and years and they can pay alimony in support of the other spouse. But in other cases, the support for both spouses' financial well-being in the future is taken care of more via property division than via alimony. The key is that this is all very flexible and it's all very specific to the two people involved in the case, what all of the things are happening in your lives, in your working lives, in your financial lives, with your health, with the length of your marriage. It's not a clear answer, but there is a lot of opportunity to create something that will work for you and your situation. So this is something you're going to want to talk to your lawyer about a lot so that you make sure you understand the interplay between property division and alimony and continuing to work or retiring in the context of a divorce of a long married couple who are empty nesters. If you're an empty nester or if you're planning to be an empty nester and you're considering divorce, please feel free to give us a call so we can give you more information about the things you're wondering about.